air traffic over Sydney coming to a near standstill. Busy city streets all over the world deserted. A breath of fresh air thanks to mass lockdowns. The coronavirus is changing how we travel. Public transport is a no-go for many. They're afraid of catching the virus. Some are turning to motorbikes and bicycles. This shop's cashing in.
People are saying they haven't ridden a bike in 25 years, and they're getting old bikes out, they're buying new bikes, they're looking to commute to work instead of catching public transport. So it's kind of a renaissance of the bike, really, certainly in London.
Dublin is clearing car parks and lanes to make way for bike paths. Buenos Aires is widening walkways to allow for social distancing. The crisis is changing mobility for good.
But for better or worse, critics say clearing lanes will create bigger traffic jams, more pollution, more noise. Or could more people ditch cars altogether? A lot of cities are taking steps. European and American capitals are rolling out thousands of kilometres of bikeways, and many are offering free bike sharing. Global centres are automating crossing signals. You don't have to press a potentially contaminated button anymore or spread your germs to a bus driver. You don't need a ticket in dozens of cities during the crisis. But back to the renaissance of the bike. Here's DW's Lisa Lewis in Paris.
In times of COVID-19, Marie Limousin is all the more happy she bought an e-bike a few months back. Even better, her hometown Fontenay-sous-Bois, 3 kilometers outside of Paris, picked up over half the bill as part of a program to promote cycling. I used to take public transport to Paris, but I have now decided to always cycle downtown. I'm too worried to take the metro. It's impossible to keep a safe distance from other passengers. I feel much more secure on my bike. And cycling is getting easier here. Paris is carving out 50 kilometers of new temporary bike paths and banning cars from certain streets. Cities and regions across France are doing the same, setting aside thousands of kilometers for two-wheel traffic. These new lanes are really well done, and I'd like them to become permanent. It's so good not to depend on the timetables of public transport, and you're not being held up by the frequent delays on the metro. What's more, the central government is putting 20 million euros on the table to subsidize bike repairs by as much as 50 euros. Its effort is bearing fruit. This bike repairman says he's never had so many requests. We receive about 50 calls a day and as many emails. There are a lot of people, especially elderly ones, who now get their bike out of the basement and want to get back in the saddle. But not everybody is happy about the pro-bike policy. Drivers' groups complain there is now less space for cars. With the air conditioning switched on and the windows closed, you have practically no chance of catching the virus in your car. You can feel safe. And for people like me, who live 100 kilometers away from Paris, the car is the only alternative to public transport. Plus, it's great to cycle when it's sunny, but in November or December, people won't want to use their bike anymore. But Marie hopes Parisians' newfound love for cycling is more than a temporary fling. I hope that people will have enjoyed the quiet during the lockdown. We could hear the birds chirp again. People should realize how noisy cars are. Taking the bike is good for you, and once you start, you get hooked. She intends to keep on cycling and hopes the government will declare even more streets car-free zones.
Benjamin Vella is director of the Integrated Transport and Innovation Mobility Program in the US. We're looking at the biggest chance in our lifetimes to change something. Do you think the world will rethink mobility?
Well, I think we are thinking mobility. We're thinking about it in the urgency of the crisis right now. You see cities like Berlin, Paris, London, Oakland, Minneapolis, Austin in the United States changing over and so-called, we say, opening up streets to people and closing them to cars. You see London re-envisaging its low-emission congestion charge zone. So we're seeing a lot of change right now. I think we will probably see a continuation of that because more and more people are out walking and biking. They also need those spaces. The one thing is public transport, on the other hand, is providing more of a crucial service with fewer riders, say with 60 to 90% fewer riders right now. But that would be probably a question of what we see as we emerge out of this crisis, whether decision makers will also make similar moves to prioritize public transport.
But Ben, a lot of things are going to return to normal at some stage. What makes you think they won't return to normal as far as mobility goes?
Well, I think they will return to normal to a certain extent. Now, to what extent they diverge from this pathway, I think is up to decision makers and what they do in the policy decisions in how we prioritize public space and street space in cities. After previous recessions or downturns, we have had, after a big drop in vehicle traffic, a return in vehicle traffic. I suspect we'll see largely the same. Now, will this affect people's sort of mindset of, I don't want to go into shared spaces such as public transport? Will I want to walk or bike to work? Will I just want to continue working from home? We don't know exactly what those trends are. But I think we are seeing, at least right now, this surge in cycling and walking, and some cities indicating now that they want to prioritize more public transport movement.
If you were in charge, what would your vision be?
Well, if I were in charge before this crisis, I would say we have issues that are going on, like air quality of some 3.5 million people dying per year, physical inactivity, over 3 million deaths per year. We have 1.3 million deaths per year in road fatalities. And so, let alone the emissions that come from the transport sector, some 14% of global emissions. And so I would say, let's move to sustainable mobility. Let's move through public transport, which is more efficient, safe. Let's move through safe walking and biking and deprioritize the movement of the car. Now, I don't see anything changing after this crisis of where I would go in terms of those same types of decisions.
But can public transport be sustainable, environmentally friendly, economical and crisis-proof all at once?
I think that is a good question. I don't think we have the answer to that right now. For example, in the U.S., the federal government stepped in and provided $25 billion to the public transport industry to survive during this time. There's also talk that that's not enough. Similar things are going on in other countries. So governments are going to have to come in some places like Africa, Latin America. You do not have government subsidy to support public transport to this extent. So there is a huge question. So we're going to have to figure out how to financially sustain public transport in this short term. Now, in the longer term, however, I do not see much changing, say, from a planning point of view. But again, I think this depends on how decision makers want to invest in resources. Do they want to make car-oriented cities, or do they want to make places that are sort of what we call multimodal, where people can get around from any variety of ways?
Benjamin Weller, thank you very much for being on the show, coming to us from Washington there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Time for your questions on the coronavirus. Our science correspondent Derek Williams has been busy researching the different aspects you keep uncovering for us.
Does the virus have psychological effects on some individuals?
Yes, COVID-19 can impact on mental health in different ways. First, like other respiratory infections, it can affect behavior, causing a kind of grab bag of symptoms known as impaired consciousness. A study from China showed that around 1 in 3 patients experienced neurological changes that could affect mental awareness and cognition, causing symptoms like confusion and dizziness and erratic behavior. Then there are, of course, the effects that having the disease can have on long-term mental health, particularly in those who experienced severe cases, and also, of course, those who lost loved ones to the virus. And don't forget those healthcare workers on the front lines, they're going to feel the effects too. So for many, many people, the psychological trauma caused by COVID-19 has become a heavy burden to bear.
Is it a bad idea for people with hypertension to run errands due to their higher risk? Should they definitely remain at home?
This question can't really be answered at this point. Hypertension, or chronic high blood pressure, is a comorbidity associated with more severe outcomes if you catch COVID-19. But in the media, when we say this, we often leave out something important, which is that it still isn't clear yet whether there's any causality. Here's the thing. Who experiences severe COVID outcomes most frequently? It's the elderly, right? But a whole lot of elderly people also have pre-existing hypertension. So there are actually two different ways to interpret the numbers. One is that high blood pressure is actually contributing to worse outcomes. The other is that because elderly people have hypertension disproportionately and are also being affected by COVID-19 disproportionately, the statistics are simply overlapping. So hypertension wouldn't be causal. And having high blood pressure then wouldn't increase your risk of getting or having COVID-19. I'm not saying that's the case. We don't know yet. But it's definitely food for thought for anyone with hypertension.
People in Sweden aren't subject to lockdown restrictions and don't wear masks. Why is what's happening in other countries not happening there?
From the start, Sweden has taken its own unique approach to the pandemic. It didn't force businesses or schools to close, and society has remained largely open. The government has only issued recommendations to the populace and says it relies on Swedes to take responsibility for their actions. The national strategy was supposed to be aimed at protecting people at the greatest risk, like the country's elderly, but they have been hit hard by COVID-19 there. Swedish health authorities think their response is more sustainable when confronting a disease that looks to be with us for a long time. Compared to its Scandinavian neighbors, which imposed much tighter restrictions, deaths per million in Sweden are currently significantly higher, but they're lower than they are in some other European countries. So in a nutshell, with its response, Sweden has taken a gamble, and nobody knows yet whether that gamble is going to pay off.